Hey guys, this is Isaac from Contender Bicycles, and today we're going to be talking about performance road bikes. Performance road bikes have been a staple in companies' lineups, in the majority of companies' lineups for quite some time now. But recently, in the last couple of years, in 5-ish years, compact aero bikes have become a little bit more bigger on the scene. We've seen bikes like the Cervelo S5, the Foil RC from Scott, or like the Dogma F from Pinarello gain in popularity, and also most companies are now making a more specific race compact aero bike. So as compact aero bikes have become more popular, the performance bike section has now fallen more in between them and endurance bikes, and they've become a little bit more specialized and quite a bit more capable. Why would you want to buy a performance road bike as a road cyclist, and which one might suit you best, and which one of the bikes we carry might suit your purposes for what you want to do better? Performance bikes are pretty awesome because they can be for the day in, day out racer, they can be for the canyon sprinter, but they're also still comfortable enough to take on long rides for that same racer who might have a week off and they want to do a century. They're still comfortable for those reasons, but they do still have aggressive stack heights when you compare them to endurance bikes, which means if you want to race them, you can absolutely race them, but they don't have this super hunched over flat position of an aero bike, which would lead to discomfort over, let's say, something like a 7 or 8 hour ride, or even something shorter than that if that's your jam. The thing about performance road bikes is they fit a very wide variety of audiences. We have 4 bikes here today. We have the Scott Addict RC, the BMC Teammachine, the Pinarello Prince, and then the Orbea Orca. We're gonna go over which one of these bikes might suit your ride style best and which one might be for you. The first bike we have on our list here today is the Scott Addict RC, seen right there. The Scott Addict RC is a very, very sleek looking bike, and it is also incredibly fast. Some of this is due to the cable routing that goes through the bars and into the stem from behind the bar where it can't be seen. So if you look at this bike from any angle, even from underneath, you can't see any cables visible even underneath the stem, which means you have a very, very clean looking bike, which also means it is a fairly aerodynamic bike. The Scott itself, reach-wise, is a little bit longer in reach with a semi-aggressive stack height comparatively to the rest of these bikes, which means it can equally be raced as it can be ridden long days because of that flatter position it has. In a size large, it has a 395 millimeter reach, and it has a 568.5 millimeter stack height. So fairly aggressive stack height compared to a long reach means that you have a bike that lies the rider a little bit flatter in position wise, which means it can be re-raced fairly efficiently, which does make sense considering that RC, the ending acronym on that name, does stand for racing concept. The Scott Addict RC also uses a D-shaped aero seat post across every single one of its models. And then it also is a little bit more aerodynamic than some of the other bikes we see here, like the BMC with the thicker tubing on the fork and such. The BMC Teammachine is probably going to be the most aggressive bike on this list, with the lowest stack height and still a fairly long reach. Not the longest reach, as the Scott Addict is a little bit longer, but it is still one of the longer ones. And with that super aggressive stack height, that means you can take this bike fairly aggressively and lower it quite a bit. That does make it a crit racing favorite, as you can make it aggressive, but you run some spacers underneath it, it is still comfortable for a long day. The BMC Teammachine has a very thick bottom bracket area, which means this bike is extremely stiff and maneuverable, and it makes it super, super snappy and quick handling. The BMC Teammachine also does internal cabling like the Scott on the higher end ones, but that does not remain true for every single one of the models. On this model right here, you can see there are cables visible. They have the cables that goes in front of the head tube and into the fork, and then down into the down tube to go to the rear brake. But on the topper end ones, they do go into the stem and then through the headset, creating a nicer look on the top end Teammachines, but it is still accessible from underneath the stem and you can see them slightly. That means it may not look quite as sleek as the Scott, but it is a little bit easier to work on. So I guess depending on what you value in a bike, that might be a pro or a con to you. Again, it uses a carbon D-shaped aero seat post across all models like the Scott does, and it has a very, very stiff and lightweight frame. In size 56, this one has a 392 millimeter reach, while it has a 565 millimeter stack. Very low stack height, most aggressive on this list. This is the Pinarello Prince. The Pinarello Prince is one of the more snappy and maneuverable bikes on this list, with one of the shortest reaches, but also one of the highest stacks. So it is kind of an opposite to the Teammachine, and it sits but it is still a super awesome bike. In a size 56, it has a 388 millimeter reach and a 586 millimeter stack, which does make it extremely maneuverable with that shorter reach, meaning the bike is a little bit snappier because the handlebars are a little bit closer to you. But the frame itself, Pinarello has been very great about making an extremely stiff frame. This frame is probably one of the stiffest ones we have here, which means that rear end will feed into any input you give it from pedaling power wise. It also uses an asymmetrical rear end, which is very popular for Pinarello. It's one of the reasons why Pinarello became super popular, which is another reason why the rear end feels so stiff, is because the drivetrain is in a better line. This Pinarello also uses fully internal cabling, more along the same lines as the Scott, where it goes through the bar and into the stem instead of underneath the stem like the BMC. So it is harder to work on than the BMC, but it is a little bit more aerodynamic and better looking from that standpoint. But it also uses standard faceplate on the stem. The Scott does not use a standard faceplate, while this does, which from a looks perspective may not be as nice looking to you, but at the same time it's easier to get this bar on and off if you ever need to change cables or anything like that. These bikes do run a little bit big due to that high stack height, so keep that in mind. But if you like to run aggressively, you might want to size down, or if you like a more comfortable bike, you might want to stay true to size. This is the Orbea Orca, and the Orbea Orca is probably one of the most versatile bikes on this list. With a very general geometry and tons of drivetrain configurations available from Orbea, it is probably one that is going to suit the biggest amount of riders. Orbea also has their Mayo program, which is available for some of the higher end Orcas, which lets you choose out the colors of your paint job and maybe even write your name on it on the chainstay if that is something you would like to do. These Orbea Orcas are offered in SRAM or Shimano componentry, and with that general geometry, they use a 388 millimeter reach, same as the Pinarello, but compared with a 579 millimeter stack height in a size 55. You notice I said 55 instead of 56, unlike the rest of the bikes, and that is because the Orbea does in between sizes instead of, and unlike the rest of the bike world. So the rest of these bikes have been 56s. This one is a 55, but its size is the same as a 56 from, let's say, Scott or BMC. The Orbea Orcas themselves have a very generalized geometry and will fit a ton of riders along with those numbers I just said. And they use a D-shaped seat post, which is fairly aerodynamic on the top end of the range, but they use a round seat post on the lower end of the range. These ones do use fully internalized cabling in a very similar way to the BMC does on the BMC's top model lineups, with cables routing underneath the bar and then into the stem via plastic cover underneath the stem, which means this will be easier to work on when you compare them to the top end Scotts or Pinarellos, but it is going to be harder to work on than, let's say, the lower end BMC Teammachines, because the lower end BMC Teammachines have more externally cables. But it does look incredibly clean, and I'm actually a really big fan of the way Orbea does their cables, because it creates a bike that not only looks good, it is a little bit easier to work on than, let's say, routing it from behind the barn into the stem. That is from the mechanics perspective, but overall these Orbea Orcas are really awesome. If you're looking to get a performance road bike, and if you think the performance road bike might be the bike for you, or if you have any questions about this, feel free to go to our website, contenderbicycles.com, or visit us in store in Salt Lake City or Park City. Thank you so much.